Rich men and their single-engine airplanes. Just because you have money doesn't mean you have any sense. A jet engine made it to a propeller that guzzles 100 gallons an hour on the way to 1,300 horsepower. They say the person who represents themselves in court has an idiot for a client. What about the iterant private pilot flinging a $3 million aircraft into a snow-drenched sky? The regulators let the insurance companies fret about the risk. The manufacturers do everything they can to make a pressurized, high-speed, all-weather airplane simple enough for an individual of accomplishment to buy and fly without any meaningful experience. The only thing they haven't done is to stop dying in the clouds. The preliminary report from Cristobal begins like this. The pilot, 1 passenger, and 3 pets were fatally injured. It's a sort of preamble that'll make a Russian boss mutter about John Wick. Those 3 pets died tragically following a botched RNAV approach to runway 36 at San Angelo Regional Airport in Texas. Air traffic control gave the pilot a 30-degree heading to become established on the final approach course. 8 seconds later, the aircraft passed through the runway center line and the pilot radioed, "We overshot it." The controller wasn't in a great mood. "I know, that's why I gave you 030. A second following this, the airplane began a right turn with a 1,000 foot per minute rate of descent. In 4 short seconds, the turn tightened and the descent rate increased to 5,000 feet per minute. That's just shy of 60 miles per hour straight down. 3 seconds later, the pilot made his last utterance. "We got a problem." The final reported trajectory depicted a spiraling 15,000 foot per minute rate of descent. That's a straight line top speed of a 1995 Corvette straight at the ground. Weather reports, unsurprisingly, indicate that the aircraft was in the clouds until the final moments prior to impact. The loss of control seemingly due to what is ubiquitously referred to as loci. A hefty portion of this kind of accident occurs when a pilot loses orientation with the ground while in the clouds. In most cases, the attitude indicator in the aircraft is operating properly. The pilot simply becomes confused and augers in. It seems stupendous, but many smart men have punched a hole in the ground because of it, or been lost at sea. 40 years after Camelot fell, loci killed a former president's son. This is the thing that you've got to know about aviation. It's the great equalizer, the place where the powerful go to prove their mettle and die. Double the 3 pets and make them passengers instead. That's the main difference in the beginning of the NTSB report from Recluse, Wyoming, where a Grammy-winning gospel group rounded out the passenger list in the back. They were on their way to Anchorage to work a cruise. The PC-12 is a wonderful airplane, but it's not the best way to get from Nebraska City to Alaska. The first destination had been Billings, Montana, either for fuel or to drop the Nelons off for a commercial 2-stop through Seattle. It didn't end well. 66 years after Buddy Holly breathed his last, the music died once again. The pilot was eulogized by Governor Kemp of Georgia. Larry's impact on our state will not be forgotten. The Georgian pilot had an eclectic career. He was a cop in the 70s before co-founding Georgia Arms and Ammunition. He co-owned Dependable Bonding with his wife. He also owned a warehouse storage facility and a car wash. He was head of the Roopville Baptist Church security team and had been appointed by Governor Kemp to the board for the Georgia Department of Corrections, where he was serving as chairman. The register owner of the Pilatus was Heine Enterprises, a perfect match to the 60-year-old pilot's surname. The pressurized single was in cruise at 26,000 feet when all hell broke loose. The pilot told Salt Lake City Air Traffic Control that he had lost his autopilot. He declared an emergency, which likely had more to do with the series of sharp banks and erratic variations in altitude than the failure of the automation. Following this, radio contact was lost. Larry and his passengers were discovered in remote terrain in the Wyoming wilderness on the eastern edge of 40 acres of burned grain. Loci. Too much airplane for a civilian. In the clouds, a hair below the peak elevation of Everest is no place for a hobbyist. All evidence is that Larry was a good guy. Successful in everything he put his hands to, salt of the earth, not the sort to brag with pretentious Latin verbs in a battle of wits. He hadn't been hauling dogs to groomers. Likely the flight had been Baptist charity to the Southern Singing Group. But those skies don't care. The righteous get no favor over sinners. It's a place where only the bold dare to travel, but it's also a place where being bold will get you killed. On a snowy day after Thanksgiving in South Dakota, a pilot and 10 passengers loaded onto an aircraft with 9 seats. It had been a quick trip from the eastern edge of Idaho for an overnight in a local lodge, followed by a day of hunting rounded out by a return flight. Just shy of 600 miles, it was an easy 2-hour hop on the Pilatus. The NTSB found plenty of photos and videos of the aircraft on the tarmac just prior to the fateful flight. When you've got 10 passengers, there's going to be a few megabits devoted to iPhone videos. The pilot, for his part, skipped the hunting session to go to the airport to prep the turboprop. He swept snow from the wings, but the horizontal stabilizer on top of the T-tail was too tall for him to reach. He had to have known that snow was up there. He should have known that the PC-12 manual required the aircraft to be cleared of contaminants by approved de-ice fluid when it was actively snowing. But the sort of guy who packs 11 people onto an airplane with 9 seatbelts isn't the type to get tangled in red tape. Maybe he figured the snow would blow off the tail once the aircraft hit 80 knots. Maybe he was an all-around good guy. Maybe he was negligent. There's a bunch of technical stuff wrapped up in this one. The aircraft was over 100 pounds above the maximum takeoff weight when the pilot applied power on the runway. The center of gravity was after the certification limits. By the NTSB's estimation, just a hair further aft and the aircraft would have fallen onto its tail while sitting on the ramp. Pilatus attempted to recreate the squat angle seen in a picture of the aircraft as it taxied away. They dumped 200 pounds of sandbags as far aft as possible, but couldn't get the nose as high or the tail as low as that seen in the photo. Eventually, they got a ladder to reproduce the image. The pilot did a few things right. He turned on propeller de-icing, which heated the edges of the propellers to prevent ice buildup. He also opened the inertial separator, which reroutes intake air into the engine to ensure that chunks of ice aren't ingested into the rather expensive turbine. If he was paying attention, he would have noticed pusher ice mode enunciated in green on his electronic display. When the PC-12 is configured for icing conditions, the stall computer adjusts flight control protection. In ice, wings stop producing lift at a slower airspeed and lower angle of attack than they do while clean. The Pilatus is equipped with a stick shaker which alerts the pilot to an impending wing stall and a stick pusher which aggressively nudges the nose down to unload the aircraft once a wing has stalled. When pusher ice mode is active, 92 knots is the prescribed speed for a flaps 15 takeoff. The pilot rotated 4 knots early, which would have been survivable if he hadn't pitched up in such a hurry. 7 degrees per second on the rotation. For comparison, 3 degrees per second is a general target taught by the airlines to professional pilots. As soon as the weight was off the main gear, the stick shaker activated for the first time. Pitch oscillations dominated over the ensuing moments. An AFCG makes an aircraft more efficient, but it also makes it touchy. All told, the stick shaker triggered 6 times, with the stick pusher activating 5 times. All of this happened within 33 seconds, which was the amount of time from liftoff to impact. The aircraft climbed 380 feet before a sharp roll resulted in a steep bank and a loss of control. We'll make a quick count of the errors here. The pilot cleared contamination from the aircraft in an unimproved manner. He skipped the tail altogether. That's an important bit. He overloaded the aircraft. The NTSB assumes that the 2 extra passengers were sitting somewhere in the aisle when the aircraft took off. The center of gravity was absurdly aft of legal limits to the extent that the airplane taxied with a noticeable pitch on its way to tragedy. The number 1 pitot heat, which is supposed to be on for takeoffs and protects flight instruments against ice, was off for the duration of the flight. The pilot rotated 4 knots too slow and far too aggressively. The NTSB noted that the conditions were primed for vestibular illusions, which historically have caused loss of control accidents, but in this case, they believe that the aft center of gravity made the aircraft too unstable to fly. The pilot fought like hell but couldn't overcome all his mistakes. I don't know him well enough to call it arrogance. Maybe he was just too nice. 8 dead because he didn't have it in him to disappoint and cancel the flight. Remarkably, 3 of the 11 survived. It's hard to believe looking at the wreckage. Each second in life is a march towards death. It's left to figure out whether it's a tragedy or a transformation, whether there's light at the end or only darkness. It doesn't change the math for an aviator. The only way to survive is to go 120 knots 1,000 feet above the earth. It's not the time to hope for the best. Beware of rich men with turbines. If they've got a $3 million aircraft, they're very good at something. Don't bet your life it's airmanship. Okay, that's all.